If you are visiting Iceland for the first time, be sure to watch this video because in it, I am going to be sharing all the most important tips and must-knows that first-timers need to have the best trip ever. Now, in case you're new here, hi, I'm Christina from happytowander.com. And this channel is all about practical travel tips from someone who's been there, done that, so be sure to like and subscribe if that sounds like your kind of thing. This video is going to focus on general Iceland travel tips, but I do have a Reykjavik specific video for the capital coming out next week as well, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Now, let's get started with some Iceland travel planning tips. First off, flying into the country, do know that Iceland Air offers some really affordable fares and some incredibly handy stopover programs as well. That allows you to schedule a flight with them to another destination, then stop in Iceland at no extra cost. This essentially means that you're able to get two destinations for the price of one. I will say though, do not be blinded by the cheap flight prices and trick yourself into believing that you're actually going to save money by flying through Iceland. Because the truth is, Iceland is a pricey enough destination that any savings from booking with Iceland Air will be wiped out almost immediately by actually traveling there. But I will say it is an incredible bucket list destination that is well worth the extra cost. So keep that in mind. Now, in terms of arriving in Iceland, the main international airport in Iceland is actually in Keflavik, which is about a 40-minute drive from the capital of Reykjavik. Some first-timers get very confused and assume that the airport is actually located in the capital. And this is a very easy mistake to make actually, because when you're even looking at the departure signs at the airport, it will say Reykjavik. But no, the reality is the airport is in Keflavik, so definitely factor this into your plans if you're doing a very short stopover, or maybe if you're booking anything in the capital right after your flight, because you're actually going to need to get into Reykjavik, which takes about 40 minutes. Of course, Reykjavik does have its own airport with the code RKV, but this one mainly services domestic airlines, so do not get it mixed up with Keflavik Airport, whose code is KEF. Now, when booking your flights though, if you end up arriving really late, let's say after midnight, something to really take note of is that you should avoid driving straight away when you're tired upon arrival. So before you go, make sure you're well rested. This might mean taking a nap in your rental car before heading out, or maybe staying your first night somewhere you can easily take a bus or taxi to. Now, this is obviously a much safer option than just forcing yourself to drive while you're tired. And also don't forget you would also be putting others in danger as well by driving before you're well rested. Now, if you are looking for accommodation that is near the airport, there are a handful of places that participate in a program known as Nap and Go. Now, this program aims to incentivize people to not just start driving when they're tired upon arrival. Instead, they want you to actually get a proper rest by offering you some discounted rates at accommodation close by to the airport. This way, you can snooze for a few hours after you arrive. Now, unfortunately, as of 2025, it seems like only 3 places are participating in this program, and to actually get access to the rates, you have to call them. So I'm not sure how good the savings actually are, but it might be worth looking into. Now, speaking of accommodation, do try to book your accommodation as early as possible, especially if you are traveling during a peak season like summer, for instance. Accommodation prices in Iceland are no joke, with hostel bunks starting at $60 per night in peak season. In a shared room, by the way. So your best defense, apart from winning the lottery, is of course to book as early as you possibly can. You can generally also save money by booking accommodation with a shared bathroom if you're up for it. Or you could also choose to camp, which is generally about $20 to $40 per person per night. Unsurprisingly, Iceland is home to some of the most scenic campsites in the entire world, and generally, camping culture in Iceland is quite relaxed, meaning it isn't mandatory to pre-book, and in some cases you actually can't pre-book. Rather than have designated camping plots like in many North American campsites, a lot of the time Icelandic campsites are more casual, so you generally just need to turn up at a campsite and claim your spot on what often is just a massive field. Some campsites, not all, are available for pre-booking on the Parka app, while some others are first come first serve on the day of. Just be mindful of reception hours if you're going to do it this way, because they're not always open 24/7. And do also keep in mind that Iceland has some seriously ferocious and unpredictable wind. So be sure to consider this when you're weighing your options as to whether or not sleeping in a tent is a good idea. Now, speaking of camping, if it's your first time in Iceland, I would definitely consider renting a camper van for a longer trip to save both money and time backtracking. This is what I did on my first trip to Iceland. We rented a camper van and very ambitiously covered the entire ring road in just under 10 days. If you have the time and don't mind forgoing luxuries like private bathrooms, this can be a phenomenal way to travel around Iceland. We rented with Cuckoo campers and had a really great experience with them. Now, in advance of your trip, another thing I would highly recommend you do is make sure you have mobile data for your trip because you're definitely going to need it. From translating signs and paying for parking to navigating all over the country, you are definitely going to need mobile data when in Iceland. And my personal pick for this would be getting an eSIM in advance, because then you have connection as soon as you land. So on that note, this week's video is brought to you by Airlo, my go-to eSIM provider that has options for over 200 countries and regions around the world, including Iceland. For those who haven't used one before, eSIM stands for Embedded SIM, meaning it's pre-installed on your device and connects you to local telecom networks 100% digitally, eliminating the need for physical SIM cards or pocket Wi-Fis. Best of all, you can set everything up from your phone in advance and enjoy stress-free connection as soon as you arrive. When I tell you I would not have survived this trip without my eSIM, I am not joking. Upon landing in Keflavik, there were no signs for storage lockers, so I needed to actually search up a guide online to find them, and they were hidden in the most obscure spot. Luckily, I had set up my Airlo eSIM at the airport before leaving, getting everything purchased and set up on the app within minutes. All I had to do upon landing was turn it on, and I was able to connect to mobile data hassle-free for much cheaper than roaming. So, if you want to try them out, you can download the Airlo app by scanning here, and be sure to use the code HAPPY3 to save on your first purchase. You can also check out my complete Airlo guide to see a step-by-step on how to set your eSIM up. So thanks again to Airlo for sponsoring this week's video. Next, let's tackle the best time to visit Iceland. Generally, summer is the best time to go due to longer days and better weather. Between June and August, you're pretty much guaranteeing yourself 20+ hours of daylight per day, which is of course ideal for long road trips or making the most of your time in the country. This also coincides with puffin season, with peak times for puffin viewing being between June and July. That said, if your goal is seeing the aurora borealis in Iceland, the best times are supposedly between mid-September to early April. Though of course this phenomenon is very difficult to predict, so even during my August trip there were sightings. All that said, if I were organizing a first trip to Iceland, I would personally go for the summer, acknowledging that this would be the most expensive and crowded time of the year. But September to April could also be worthwhile if you're looking for fewer crowds and lower prices, acknowledging that weather can be unpredictable and daylight hours are quite limited. Of course, this decision of when to go might depend on where exactly you want to visit as well. So on that note, in terms of where to actually go in Iceland, do know that most visitors tend to stick to the main sites around Route 1, also known as Iceland's Ring Road. This route basically circles the entire country, spanning over 1,300 kilometers and passing by some of Iceland's most iconic sites and landscapes along the way. For first-time visitors, sticking around the Ring Road really keeps things simple, because the road itself is pretty much entirely paved and also really well maintained, with plenty of remarkable sights along the way. It's also quite a well-traveled area, meaning great signage and different tourist resources. For a first-timer, this makes things very doable and very easy. That said, doing the entire Ring Road isn't possible for everyone depending on time. It is very common to just do bits and pieces of this route instead as well, like for instance just doing the South Coast portion. Luckily for those who don't have the 10 or more days that it takes to adequately cover the entire Ring Road, there are many official driving routes for tourists that make sightseeing super simple. Some of the most popular ones include the famous Golden Circle, which is doable in one day from Reykjavik and covers Thingvellir National Park, the Geysir geothermal area, and Kutafoss waterfall. There's also the Silver Circle in Western Iceland, which covers 146 kilometers and passes through waterfalls, craters, hot springs, and glaciers. As well as the Diamond Circle in Northern Iceland, which is a 250-kilometer loop with highlights including geothermal pools, waterfalls, and potential whale watching. And many visitors also choose to do a loop around the Snæfellsnes Peninsula. This is located in West Iceland and is home to some very dramatic and iconic sites like the famous Kirkjufell mountain. Again, all these routes are very well traveled and easy to do on your own or by booking with a tour company. The flip side though, as you can imagine, is that there are lots of people that do these same routes, and these will definitely be the most crowded places to go. So what I would suggest is you don't forget about the beauty of Iceland's highlands if you have the time and you want to escape the crowds. In case you're unfamiliar with them, the highlands refer to the vast interior of Iceland away from the coast. This region is filled with some of the country's most dramatic natural landscapes. And compared to the ring road, the highlands have way fewer visitors. But I have to say, after doing a trip specifically to see them very, very recently, they are not without their challenges. For one, the highlands and their infamous F-roads are only accessible between June and September. So there's a fairly small window of time that they can be safely visited. Weather here can also be really unpredictable, and the roads themselves can be quite difficult to navigate, with them largely being gravel paths that run over rivers and all kinds of varied, potentially challenging terrain. So definitely weigh those pros and cons when you're deciding where to go. Also, do not just plan your trip around cool spots that you saw on Instagram, I implore you. This is how you can end up with a very disjointed itinerary that takes you just from one photo op to the next. In my opinion, Iceland is best enjoyed slowly rather than racing from one site to the next, and honestly, a lot of the hyped up spots on Instagram, like for instance the infamous Solheim plane crash, aren't really worth the time in my opinion. I would also say it is very important to build flexibility into your itinerary as plans may need to change. Whether it's due to weather or other reasons, you really can't count on your Iceland trip to go exactly as you planned it, so definitely build some buffer time into your trip and also avoid anything that is strictly non-refundable when it comes to activities and tours, because you don't want to be stuck doing an activity in the completely wrong weather conditions. All that said, I do not state this lightly. Make sure you prepare your wallet because Iceland is a very, very expensive country. On a recent layover, I basically spent $100 before even leaving the airport, between $50 for luggage storage and another $50 to pay for the flybus. Though all that said, there are ways to save money. I'll expand more on specific tips later, but I do think the number one most important tip in this regard is to book accommodation that has kitchen facilities. So that way you can just buy groceries for some meals and you're not forced to eat every single meal out. Iceland, unsurprisingly, can be a very expensive country to dine out in, especially if you're doing it for every single meal. Based on my experience this past summer, the rough price range for things was about 800 krona for small bites like a pastry or hot dog, which is about 9 Canadian dollars, 3,000 krona minimum for mains at a budget sit-down restaurant, 1,500 krona for a beer. But of course, on the upper end, there are fine dining experiences that run for prices are way more than that, like 66,000 krona per person, which is like 750 Canadian dollars. So yes, it is a spectrum and there are more budget-friendly places to dine out in, but it can be a really huge cost saver for you to just book somewhere that has a kitchen so that you're able to prepare a few meals for yourself with groceries, which are, relatively speaking, pretty affordable, especially if you stick to more budget-friendly supermarket chains, but more on this topic a little bit later. Now, if you're staying in more remote areas outside of the capital as well, finding decent options for dining out might be pretty limited. So in general, I do think it just makes sense to book a place with a kitchen no matter what. Now let's continue with another must-do before you leave, which is to make sure you get a travel-friendly card, as you'll be using it a lot to pay for everything in Iceland. In Iceland, they use cards for practically everything, and I didn't even take out cash once. So yes, definitely make sure you have a card that isn't going to be charging you fees for using it abroad. My go-to has been Wise for years, and not only do they not charge you extra fees for usage abroad, they also allow for 2 free ATM withdrawals per month, and you even get a card sent to you for free. You can check out the description for my referral link, which will give you your first transfer free of charge. I also have to say, do not rely too much on weather forecasts, because weather is very unpredictable. This is especially true if you're looking at forecasts more than a few days in advance. So yes, do know that weather can and does change very frequently in Iceland, so you want to plan and be prepared for pretty much all potential weather cases. The best resource for weather in any case is the official website of the Icelandic Met Office, which can be found at en.vetter.is. And if you're someone who believes that there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing, you are going to love this next tip, which is to pack properly for Iceland by having items fit for all weather types, because good gear is crucial. Do not underestimate how cold it can get in Iceland, even in the summer. Icelandic wind chill is no joke, And so no matter the season, I would ensure I have warm, reusable base layers, a warm mid layer like a fleece, as well as a solid waterproof outer shell. I would probably also pack any over-the-counter medication just in case, because some things might be hard to find in a pinch and are usually quite pricey as well from pharmacies. I will be releasing a video all about how to pack for Iceland in a few weeks' time, so be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for that. Alright, with all that planning talk out of the way, let's now talk about Iceland tips for transport and getting around. First off, it has to be said, renting a car is hands down the best way to explore the wonders of Iceland. And if you have the time and means to do this, you really won't regret it. Having your own car means you can go at your own pace and visit lesser known spots. We rented through Blue Car Rental on our most recent trip, which is an Icelandic company with an office a 5-ish minute walk from Keflavik Airport. They even had a pre-check-in option and contactless key pickup, which made things super simple as soon as we landed, so we could just get on the road right away. I do have a few notes though on renting a car. If you plan to do F-roads at any point during your trip, a 4x4 is mandatory, so do take note of that. This will of course mean that your rental is pricier, but if you want to safely and legally navigate these Highland roads, you're gonna need to pay it. And I cannot stress this enough, always make sure you are taking out the full car insurance in Iceland so that you have ease of mind. There are many random things that can go wrong when you're driving in Iceland, a lot of which is completely out of your control. So you want to make sure you have the full insurance. Trust that it is worth that extra cost. You should also familiarize yourself with common road signs before you start driving around. This is going to sound super basic, but Wikipedia actually has a really good list for you to go through. All that said though, Iceland has lots of great tour options for those who don't want to drive. These options can of course be quite pricey, but what you're really paying for here is convenience, so you can't complain. There are so many tour companies out there to choose from. I usually just search on Get Your Guide to see what's available, but yes, that can be a really good option if you're not able to rent a car. So long as you're okay with the obvious downsides, which are that, well, if you are going as part of a tour group, you don't have as much freedom to explore at your own pace. And of course, inevitably, you're going to be brought to places that have the most crowds, with not too many options to go off the beaten path either. And since someone will inevitably ask, I think I should clarify that public transport does exist in Iceland, but largely it's just meant to connect towns and villages rather than touristic spots. So if you want to experience any of Iceland's epic nature, for instance, you will really need to either rent a car or book a tour, because public buses will get you between towns, but honestly, that's not really where you're going to experience the best of what Iceland has to offer. Now, if you've chosen to rent a car, here are some more tips about driving and navigating. First off, Google Maps is a good app for general navigation, but do be wary of its time estimates. Especially if you're traveling on F-roads or gravel paths, I do think that Google Maps driving estimates kind of assume that you're going to be driving close to the speed limit, but that's just not possible in some road conditions. So during our most recent trip, we actually had a few drives where it easily took twice as long as what Google Maps estimated, so just keep that in mind. YouTube does actually have a lot of great videos, by the way, from people who have recorded themselves driving on specific F-roads, so be sure to watch those if you're not sure if you can handle a specific one. Research is key because not all F-roads are made equal. Also, do beware that Iceland is very strict on speeding and drunk driving with extremely steep fines. So make sure you are not drinking and driving at all, and also make sure to brush up on other rules of the road so that you're properly prepared. Now, when it comes time to filling up your tank, do know that most car rental companies do offer a discount with certain fuel companies. So make sure to ask about this when you get your rental, or keep an eye out for a fob like this on your keys that you can tap at the right gas station to get a discount. Now, if you have a Costco membership though, I have heard that filling up at the Costco that's just outside of Reykjavik is going to be great value. And while we're talking about getting fuel, filling up in Iceland might not be the most intuitive experience for a lot of first-timers, so I would recommend you watch some videos in advance of the process, which annoyingly does vary depending on the company. And do keep in mind that some gas stations are actually unmanned and will not take cards without PINs. And all it takes is a quick search online to see that this has led to many first-timers getting stranded at the pump, with cars getting declined left and right. To be honest, the stories to me seem very random as to what properly works. Some say that their Apple Pay works fine, others say it doesn't. Some people say their credit cards with PINs work fine, others say they still don't work. So it'll really depend. The only foolproof way it seems is either going inside to pay when it's possible to do this, or alternatively getting a prepaid card for ease, so that might be a good option. Do keep in mind though that you should always go with a set amount to fill rather than pressing the fill up button, because apparently this can put a $200 hold on your card sometimes. All in all, if your card isn't working at the pump, don't panic. This is apparently a very common issue with foreign cards. Worst case scenario, do try another gas station or go inside to pay if you can. Now, in terms of parking, definitely download the Parka or Easy Park apps for quick and easy parking payments. Most of the main touristic points of interest in Iceland do charge a parking fee. Luckily, there are apps that you can use to quickly pay for parking, so you don't need to go up to the machine. And as a bonus, you do have digital records and receipts as well, just in case you get a parking ticket and you need to fight it. We used Parka on our trip, which worked for pretty much every single parking area that we went to, except for one, so the coverage is really, really good. Do note though that most of the parking areas in Iceland do use license plate based parking rather than ticket based parking that needs to be displayed, so always triple check that you've put in the right license plate. Now, usually you will be fine to just pull up to a parking lot and pay on the app as you arrive. But you may need to reserve parking spots for busy places with limited parking. Landmannalugar, for instance, has introduced a reservation-based system for peak periods, this past year being from June 20th to September 14th, 2025, between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. So do double check for any big sites that you plan to see, whether or not you might need to reserve a spot. All right, enough yapping about transport. Now let's move on to Iceland attraction tips. First, do make sure you're booking very popular attractions and tours well in advance to avoid disappointment. Honestly, there aren't too many big attractions that require this in Iceland, but off the top of my head, the Blue Lagoon or snorkeling in Silfra would definitely be ones to book if you had your heart set on a specific date or time slot. And any niche smaller tours with specific companies might be worth booking in advance if you can, but honestly, there are always lots of tour companies in Iceland that are doing similar routes. So if you're flexible, you'll usually be able to find at least someone that you can go with. That said, I would really recommend you look for less touristy alternatives to the most popular must-sees. Granted, many of them are famous for a reason, but with waterfalls, for instance, there's literally 10,000 of them, so definitely have a zoom around on Google Maps to potentially find some of your own hidden gems and lesser known spots. This is how we ended up getting sites like these all to ourselves while finding some really cool free mud baths only 30 minutes outside of Reykjavik. So yes, for every famous waterfall, thermal bath, and hike, there are often hundreds of great alternatives. So be sure to dig around a little deeper to expand your itinerary beyond the most famous ones. And if you do plan to visit the most famous spots, I do have a tip for you to beat the crowds. Plan your visit for popular spots before or after tour groups will arrive there. On our summer trip, we took advantage of the longer daylight hours, and what we ended up doing was we visited some of the most popular sites in the country later in the evening, often having these spots all to ourselves, which was of course so incredible, and in some cases we had spectacular sunset views as well, which made the experience absolutely unforgettable. Now, for museums and other man-made attractions, do look into passes for savings. To be completely honest with you, I do think that your priority in Iceland should be the amazing nature and the landscapes. Because while there are lots of man-made attractions popping up, especially in and around Reykjavik, I don't really think anything can beat the thrill of seeing natural attractions in real life. But if you have a particular interest in something, or maybe the weather isn't cooperating and you just want to visit something that's indoors, then there are two things I want you to keep in mind. First, definitely book ahead. Often tickets are cheaper online. And two, look into any bundled deals or discounts, especially for attractions in Reykjavik. The Reykjavik City Card, for instance, includes admission to tons of different museums and attractions, as well as public transport, and lots of discounts for other spots. So definitely worth looking into for big savings. All right, now let's tackle some Iceland food and drink tips. As I've already mentioned before, dining out in Iceland is pricey. So for those who are on a budget, I will reiterate that you should definitely buy groceries and make a few of your own meals to save a lot of money. In terms of the more affordable grocery stores in Iceland, Bonus and Kronin are both solid picks that you'll find all over the country. For longer trips with more people, Costco might also make sense, but do know that they sell larger quantities of things. I mean, if you've been to a Costco before, you'll know, so you might not end up using it all. Now, we actually had extra baggage allowance on our recent trip, so we did bring some instant noodles and instant rice from brands that we liked in the UK, but honestly, I don't think this was necessary because a lot of the staples that we would have bought anyway in Iceland were pretty comparable in price, and so I don't think it's absolutely necessary to pack your own food to bring. You can definitely find great deals if you shop the specials and sales as well as stick to generic store brands like First Price. And actually some toiletry staples like toothpaste and feminine hygiene products actually seem cheaper than at home to me. So yes, grocery shopping can be a huge help. If you do shop for groceries though, do make sure you're keeping your receipts because sometimes you're gonna need to scan it. Now, this is just a quirk that I noticed, but don't worry, an employee is usually happy to scan you out if you've somehow lost your receipt in between checking out and leaving the shop. All that said, be sure to try some local specialties as well rather than just make every single meal yourself. In my opinion, part of travel is experiencing local cuisine, and luckily in Iceland, trying local dishes doesn't have to be super expensive. Some of the more affordable specialties include fish soup, cinnamon buns, skyr, which is kind of similar to Greek yogurt, and of course, Icelandic hot dogs. Lamb and Arctic char are also very popular dishes that you'll find in pretty much every Icelandic food restaurant. And another unique specialty of Iceland is produce that is grown with the help of the country's geothermal energy. A big one being tomatoes, as made super popular by Seymour, who grow tomatoes year-round in their greenhouse and have made quite the splash selling tomato soup and other specialties on site. Of course, there might be other specialties you may have heard of, like haukat, also known as fermented shark. I have never once heard of someone describe it as being anything other than disgusting, so I don't think you necessarily need to try it just for bragging rights, but do know that that is something else you can try here. Now, when dining out, another thing to keep in mind is that food halls are another great option for relatively more budget-friendly eats. These seem to be really popular now around Iceland. And they're basically food courts where there's a number of different stalls that you can choose from, with a communal seating area in the middle, which makes it really ideal for traveling in a group since people might want to have different things. And because these are quicker service type places, they tend to be cheaper than regular sit-down restaurants as well. That said, if you want to dine at a restaurant, do make sure you are booking the popular restaurants in advance if you have your heart set on it. The tomato place I mentioned earlier is a really great example of a place that will book out actually weeks in advance just because it is so popular. Odds are if you've heard of a really great restaurant to try in Iceland, other tourists know about it too, so especially if you're traveling in peak season, make sure you book ahead. And as a final note on food and drink, do keep in mind that alcohol is really pricey, so if you want to drink alcohol while you're in Iceland, buy it from duty free. Otherwise, the only place that can carry strong alcohol is known as a vinbúðin. All right, finally, let's tackle our last section, which is Iceland tips for when you actually arrive in the country. First off, a bit of info for you with short stopovers of maybe a day. As I've mentioned before, there is luggage storage at Keflavik Airport, but it is surprisingly hidden and they don't really advertise it. I think the reason is there actually aren't many spaces, and so they don't want too many people to be crowding it. And yes, as you can expect, it does end up being quite expensive. As far as I could tell, the only option was to book one for 24 hours. And so in June 2025, the prices were a medium for 2,490 krona, a large for 4,490 krona, and an extra large for 6,490 krona. I managed to get my carry-on bag and a tote in one of the large lockers, but the spaces were honestly super scarce, so I wouldn't personally rely on this option unless you have to. I will say I also saw lockers at the bus station as well if you need another option. Another thing I would advise you do is kind of familiarize yourself with Icelandic pronunciations for destination names. And honestly, this is just helpful if you ever need to ask for directions or help or anything, because generally speaking, Icelandic people speak amazing English, so usually they won't expect you to know much beyond thank you, which is takk. But the thing is, when you butcher the pronunciations of places, they might actually just have no idea what you're talking about. So it does help to kind of know the basic pronunciation guidelines in advance. Like for instance, this special D looking letter is pronounced like th. This AE combo is pronounced like I. Two L's often makes a tl sound. J is pronounced with a Y sound. And the I with this accent is an E sound. Next, in terms of tipping culture, do know that tipping culture doesn't really exist in Iceland, so luckily something at least is not as expensive as it is back home. Of course, as you can expect, many service providers will not complain if you try to give them extra money, but do know that it's not expected, and actually most Icelanders are very adamant about not bringing tipping culture into their country, so do with that info what you will. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that most public toilets do actually cost a small fee, but luckily you can pay with card. From what I could tell, the cost would usually range between 150 to 200 krona, so it's not going to break the bank, but if you can make it a point to use the free facilities, like at your hotel or at a restaurant when you have the opportunity, then that'll at least save you a little bit more money for a cinnamon month. Now, speaking of saving money, do make sure to ask for a tax-free form when you're buying items that total more than 12,000 krona. When shopping in Iceland, all non-residents are actually entitled to tax-free purchases, so as long as the items are going to be exported, or in other words taken home with you, then you don't need to pay tax. Now, the way this works is you have to get a tax-free form in store when you're making these purchases, and they have to total over 12,000 krona on one receipt. Then they'll fill out the form, attach the original receipts, and when you leave Iceland, you go to the refund point with this form to claim your refund. They may also ask to see the items, though not always, so do make sure to do this before you check all those items away in your luggage. Now, here's a tip for when you're heading home. Definitely do not plan to arrive too early for a flight at Keflavik Airport. And I learned this the hard way because before security, this small airport really doesn't have many amenities or seats for that matter. I don't think I've actually seen this many people sitting on the airport floor before, made worse by the fact that there's loads of people on layovers and check-in desks only open a few hours before your flight. Also, maybe this was just bad luck, but none of the bathrooms pre-security are very big, like 4 to 5 stalls each, which is so not enough. So there will definitely not be much for you to do pre-security, and it's not super comfortable, so don't get to the airport too early if you need to check a bag. Do note though that you might be able to check bags earlier than the 2.5 hours before your flight. That is usually considered the norm that is stated on your ticket. And the reason for that is the self-service bag drop is actually quite popular at this airport. So if you manage to get baggage tags printed at the check-in kiosks, then you can actually just check it early. Some kiosks though, according to a staff member that I spoke to, are quote unquote broken. So they won't actually print you the tags sometimes, only boarding passes. If this happens though, you can always just go up to the check-in desk for whatever airline that you're flying with and ask them. I personally checked mine 4.5 hours before just by going up to the Iceland Air check-in desk when none of the machines would print me my tags. And this saved me a lot of time waiting. So when in doubt, just ask. There's usually a weird amount of staff at this airport ready to help. Another thing that you should keep in mind when you're in Iceland is just make sure you are obeying signs and sticking to the main paths because they are there for a reason. Unfortunately, reckless behavior does get tourists killed in Iceland every year, so when there are warning signs put up or when there are trail areas that are clearly marked and roped off, it really is for a reason, so it's very important that you stick to those roped off areas and exercise caution at all times. Remember, no photo op is worth risking your life for. Some especially dangerous areas include beaches where sneaker waves can and do drag people out into the water unexpectedly. As a result, at certain beaches, they've installed a light system that now tells you when it is safe to go out to the beach and what areas you can safely explore. So really don't ignore these signs. Often trails also exist to protect local nature, so do not stray off the path, not even to get a quick photo, because it is not good for the local ecosystems. And as a final note, something that is so important is generally just be mindful and respectful everywhere you go. Be sure to clean up after yourself and just don't be a jerk about it. Iceland is no doubt a popular destination, but unfortunately with that popularity comes a fair share of bad tourists as well. But if you're visiting this amazing country, remember people do actually live here, so don't treat it like an amusement park. Make sure to clean up after yourself and be respectful of the amazing nature that you're witnessing. All right, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more travel videos just like this one, and I'll see you next time. Bye.